Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hey, welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And as the show progresses and moves forward, I'm going to be involving a lot more different kinds of topics, bringing in interesting guests, that all of which come down to one single point, which is sort of like evolving ourselves as individuals, living to our highest potential. I believe that astrology is a key component to allowing us to live to our highest potential because it is an instruction manual. It is an instruction manual that gives us the ability to fully understand ourselves through a very precise divination tool that gives us information about ourselves and shows us our strengths and our weaknesses. When we know our strengths and our weaknesses, we can adapt accordingly and create the best person that we can be. As I've said many times, we can be all that we can be this way. It's important that we are able to do this in a way that is constructive, evolutionary, and expansive. There's no sense in we're on this planet for such a short time. We want to be able to live to our fullest during that time, and that requires knowledge. Astrology is incredibly valuable, even if just for looking backwards to see where you are and what you've done and where you're going. Because when you know where you've been, you can get a pretty good idea of where you're going. There's a combination there that is inherently precise. Now, I've talked about, over the last several weeks, if you've tuned in regularly, which I hope you have, you'll see that I've been doing many different characteristics of the astrology chart in an effort to sort of enlighten you and to get your interest piqued, to get you curious about what astrology is all about. Now, you know, the problem with astrology in many cases is that it has been given a bad reputation based on the fact that people only look at their sun sign in the chart. And they say, oh, well, this is my sun sign, like, big deal. And, you know, as I've mentioned many times before, not all Sagittariuses are going to be traveling this week, although that's what they do best. But we can't make these generalizations about astrology. Well, we can make them, and we do make them. Astrologers do make them all the time. But you don't get enough precision there. And that is largely based on the information that you know, not the astrologer. It's not the astrologer's duty to cast the perfect horoscope for you. I mean, it is if you give them the proper information. It's up to you to know where the astral pieces of your chart are and what is worthwhile reading and what is worthwhile not. It's important that you understand the right parts of the chart. So I've talked about the ascendant. That's based on the birth date, the birthplace, and the birth time. When you know that, that sets the stage for all of the other houses and scenes in your chart. Every one of us, every individual, is a composite of all the signs. I'm going to say that again. Every one of us has every sign in our charts. It's hard to believe. You may be in Aries, you're like, I have no Capricorn in my chart. Actually, you do. We all have everything. We're a composite of all the signs. And when we are born, the die is cast, the planets are landing in different parts of the chart, and they take on different characteristics based on the sign and the house in which they're in. Today I'm going to be talking about what's called the Midheaven, or also known as MC, or Medium Coeli, which is the Latin term for it, meaning the highest point of the chart. What I mean by that, it's the highest point off the horizon in the chart. It's where we find the cusp of the 10th house. The 10th house in astrology is the house of occupation. Now, when I talk about occupation, I want you to understand, occupation does not necessarily mean how you earn your money. It's how you occupy your time. If you're a student, your occupation is studying, hopefully. If you're a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, your occupation is childcare and house maintenance, housekeeping. If you are driving a train, your occupation is an engineer. But you get the point. The point of the matter is it's how you occupy your time. and that's what's important. And what happens in that house when you occupy your time is what determines your occupation. So some people have a certain qualities about them that make them better suited for certain jobs than others. And this is where high school counselors could really do well by guiding their students. If they knew an inherent foundational piece of what the student was good at, what really rang their bell, if they understood that, they would be able to guide them into the proper channels. I can't tell you the number of clients who have come to me looking for astrological advice, who said, I did this, I went to law school for my father. My father was a lawyer, I went to law school for my father. And they go to law school and they realize that they hate it. They can't stand it. It's just not who they are. And so then they go off, leave their past behind and all their student debts, and they go off and they become an artist or whatever they wanted to become. The reason is because perhaps they had a certain placement in their chart that if they had known that, they never would have made that move. Because oftentimes we are influenced by external forces. Astrology holds the key to our real true potential, but oftentimes we make decisions to keep other people happy. And this is one of the problems. When the astrology meets up with the parent, for example, and the parent says, I want you to join the army, I want you to be a lawyer, I want you to be a doctor, and you're only thinking of, gosh, I want to go out and make films, or I really want to paint my masterpiece, or I want to, you know, write a great American novel, you have a meeting of the minds that is not a meeting of the minds. You have a collision of the minds is more like it, because at that point in time, you're at different modes of motivation. When we look to motivation in the chart, oftentimes I mention we look to Mars. Mars is the great motivator. It's what tells you what person is good at. What do they do best? But the midheaven, if you look at the astrology chart, you look at the midheaven, it's at the very, very top of the chart. It's part of what's called the Great Meridian, part of the Grand Cardinal Cross, or the part of the cross, not the Cardinal Cross. It's part of the Grand Cross. It's the north, south, east, west construct that I'm talking about, the X. And those are the four major points of the astrology chart. It's the ego, it's the family, it's the relationship, and it's the career. Those are the four: the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th houses in this case. Now the medium coeli, the MC, or also known as the midheaven, is just that. Midheaven is at the highest part of the astrology chart. And I don't want you to get confused by the terminology I'm using here. Just understand that this is where we see occupation occur. Occupation is defined by the 10th house cusp. Now many people, obviously everybody in the world, if we're all a composite of all the signs, that's going to be a different sign for everybody. Not everybody's going to have Gemini at their midheaven. Some people may have Taurus at their midheaven. Some people may have Capricorn at their midheaven. Some people may have Gemini, may have Virgo. Whatever they may have, it is going to be it's going to have a distinct characteristic to it that allows them to determine the right type of occupation. A person who has a Sagittarius midheaven career would do well in the travel business or as an instructor teaching. Also would do very well in the spiritual realm. If teaching spirituality is a great spiritual sense to that. But it's a great sense of adventure and abundance, and wanderlust is involved with the Sagittarius. If we see somebody who's in Aries with Aries as their occupational occupant, they would feel as if they had to do something. They had to start something. They were the great leaders. They're the pioneers, the innovators. They want to go charging out and create something brand new. When we look at Taurus, Taurus is the kind of person who loves the cook, loves the sensual qualities of life. You know, fine fabrics, food, liquor, chocolates, all of those wonderful human sense organizing abilities that we find in the person. Those are what we find in that kind of person. The Gemini. Geminis love to communicate. So you find Geminis in front of the camera, for example, like myself. You find them as writers, you find them as broadcasters, you find them as musicians. Some of the best Geminis, some of the most well-known Geminis, not best, some of the best-known Geminis are people like Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, Brian Wilson. All were heavy Geminis because they use that air quality. Gemini is a mutable air sign. They use that air quality to create. They use that to create. That's what they do. They create. So the type of person is not necessarily that where their sun sign is not always the same as their occupation. But I bet you when we go back and look at those charts, we'd see a strong propensity towards that characteristic of that individual. A person who has a Cancer in the midheaven would be someone who might very well do real estate. They're very warm and nurturing, might run a daycare center. That's, you know, the Cancer is ruled by the moon, so they're very much of an emotional-based type of occupation. They may very well be in healthcare. They may very well be in any sort of form of nurturing, caring, taking care of people like that, but they're also a water sign that's in a cardinal water sign. Someone who's a Leo, someone like a Bill Clinton, well, we know what he did. We know very well what he did. He was the ruler of the country and a very popular president of the United States. So he had that ability in his chart to be that type of person. A Virgo on the midheaven is an individual who might very well be a healthcare provider, because the Virgos love to do healthcare. They're very good in healthcare. They're very service-oriented, very much so. Libra is, if Libra is on the midheaven, that's where we find the career of the individual. We might see somebody who is working in the legal field because they have the ability to balance. Lawyers need to be able to understand both sides of the story, both sides of the case. And a good lawyer needs to be able to argue both sides of the argument. They should be able to do both sides of the argument. This is where you might find it. Also, Libra is known for beauty and known for the strong aesthetic qualities that come through personal presentation. So oftentimes we may find Libras in the beauty industry. Makeup, clothes, hair, salons, stuff like that is where we might find someone who has a strong Libra midheaven. Someone who's a Scorpio in the midheaven in that part of their chart. That's the 10th house I'm talking about. If somebody has a 10th house Scorpio, they may very well be the type of person that does research. They may be the type of person who does litigation, divorce, and estate planning. Lawyers, again, as well, because they have the ability to be very intense and secretive in some ways. Private eyes would be a great place for a Scorpio to go. Someone who likes to be a little bit out of the spotlight and yet effective in the background. And they are the people who are very effective in the background. So we might look at people like spies and stuff like that, who are very secretive, because Scorpios have that tendency to be secretive. It's not a bad quality, it's just a quality that Scorpio would have if in that part of the chart. And when I'm talking about this part of the chart, I'm basically describing the types of occupations that people might have. This does not mean that the Scorpio has Scorpio in the 10th house is not an Aries or a Gemini or an Aquarius. They may very well be. That's what their sun sign may be. But this is where, according to their chart, this is where their midheaven lands up. This is where their career slice of their pie is. And when we know where that career slice of their pie is, then we know what occupation best serves them. The next one beyond that is Capricorn. Capricorn is the hardest working sign in the zodiac for the most part. They're very determined. They're driven by Saturn. They're very determined, hardworking. I would always hire a Capricorn to do any job because they're dedicated, hardworking, and they get the job done. And they also love to build. So you might find them building houses. You might find them putting in swimming pools, stuff like that. This is the carpenters. Theirs is a very strong, mechanical kind of person. After Capricorn, we have Aquarius. Aquarius, for an occupation, is the type of person who does work for others. They are the great humanitarians of the world. So someone who had, say somebody had an Aquarius, say they had a Jupiter in Aquarius in their 10th house, which would be their house of career, they would be a great pioneer for human rights. They would be a social reformer. They would be somebody who knew that their purpose on earth was to, their occupation on earth was to help do humanitarian deeds to help move society forward. And then finally we come to Pisces. Now if Pisces is on the midheaven, we might see somebody who's a filmmaker, an artist, a dreamer. These people are very lost in, in that sort of amorphous world of dreams and illusion. So we might see, as I said, filmmakers, artists, people like that are very prominent in that part of the chart. We see it very often there as part of their occupation. What's interesting about that is that, excuse me, is that the ascendant, which is the other part of the chart, is at 90 degrees to the midheaven. So we have a 90-degree angle there. And the two work in concert with each other. I guess you can see it this way better. The two work in concert with each other because they have the ability to manifest through interaction. It's through that tension, the square that I've always mentioned before, the geometric square in the astrology chart, that provides the motivation. When we think of squares, I want you to think of steps on a staircase, going up, 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 and so forth. Those 90-degree squares are metaphors for what life is about when you are learning to do something. It is through challenge and discovery, challenge and rising to the occasion of the challenge, that we see the progress being made in the individual person. This is the challenge of life. It is climbing that stair, climbing that ladder. And we see this all the time in the astrology chart. The midheaven is the pinnacle of the person's astrology chart. It's where they find their greatest need to be. It's their mode of operation. It's their occupation. If you know a person's what they're good at, if you know where their occupation is and what they should be good at, you would hope to see them being guided in that direction. You would hope to see that someone could guide them in that direction to help them manifest, live out to the fullest extent that propensity, that character, that talent, that inbred natural talent that they have. If they're able to do that, then they can be successful. The midheaven is also key simply because it's part of the 4 pieces of the chart. When we think about it, we think of the first part of the chart, which is the ascendant. That's the sort of the ego, the individual. Then we have the family unit. Then we have the relationship. And then we have the career. The 4 major points of the grand axis, the north, south, east, west axis of the astrology chart. Because astrology really is based on time and place. As I've mentioned before, it's about being born at a place and time imbues us with characteristics of what is happening in the universe at that time. At that time. Now, if we look back at that time, we could say, gosh, what is it like to be born in the middle of a war, for example? If you're born in the middle of a war, are you going to be absorbing that energy from that time? Well, John Lennon was born October 8th, 1940, when England was being bombed. And yet, so his chart is rich with that. He's a Libra. His chart has characteristics of that turmoil that are there being born at that time. When you're introduced into the world and the world is in strife and you're hearing bombs exploding, it's going to leave an indelible impression. And it did. Look at the impression it left on him. He went on to become a great purveyor and advocate for love in the world. Amazing individual. He was a Libra. And interestingly enough, John Lennon was a Libra, which is a cardinal air sign. And Paul McCartney, his songwriting friend and compatriot, some of the greatest songwriters in the history of modern music, was a Gemini, which is a mutable air. So they both had air in their charts. Very strong air quality, meaning for creativity. Much more creativity. Now, in the difference, when we look at those 2 individuals as an example, we see that Paul McCartney, who has a much different attitude towards his intellectual qualities than John Lennon did. He was always much lighter. His songs are gentler. He's lighter. He's more free-spirited. He's not quite as deep. And yet we look at John Lennon, we see a much deeper individual, a much more sort of severe, acerbic kind of person. We see this very clearly in them. What's interesting about them as well, the Beatles, as an example, now that I'm on the subject, is that we have Ringo, who is a Cancer, and we have George Harrison, who is a Pisces. Cancer and Pisces are both water signs, so they have great emotion that goes with it. So here we have 4 individuals who changed the world, 2 air signs, 2 water signs, working together in this group. And we can see what comes of that. I can't imagine if we had 2 air signs and 2 fire signs, what that would have been like. Or 2 water signs and 2 earth signs, which were more in line with each other. Elementally, the 2 strongest songwriters worked very well with each other. They had the air quality, that intellectual spark, that creative spark that was very real. My point in all this is that it shows the occupation of the individual. This is a point in the chart that shows the occupation of the individual. If you know the occupation of the individual at a young age, you can help guide them to make precise and interesting and well-informed decisions about which way they want to go, where they're going to put their effort, where they're going to put their effort as far as, and their money and their resources as far as career and education. That person that I mentioned earlier who went to law school has probably got, you know, enormous student loan debt, and not to mention their parents who paid for all the tuition or however it worked out. But that was money not well spent. It was money spent under coercion to solve a person's problem. Now, there's something in that person's astrology chart that allowed them to be coerced into that. I will argue that for sure. I could probably tell you that by looking at their chart. I say, this is a mutable person who has been led astray by a fixed person who is very strict in their modes, in their ideas. And we'll get into this at some point in time down the road, the quality of the modes in astrology. The modes is a fixed, a cardinal, fixed, and mutable modes. And there's 4 signs for each of the different modalities. But a person who's fixed is a person who doesn't say no for an answer. They are rigid in their approach to life, and their decisions are clearly immovable. That's why they're called fixed. It's not the opposite of broken. Fixed means immovable, stable. They're not going to go anywhere. You can't budge them. They're like nailed to the ground. So if a mutable person had a fixed parent who said, you're going to law school, the mutable person and the mutable people tend to be more adaptable and easygoing and more flexible, and they don't mind, you know, adapting. They may say, okay, I'll do it. It's easier than fighting. So they go and they go through the law school, and they wake up one day, say it was a Pisces, they wake up one day and they say, gosh, I am not at all meant to be a lawyer. And yet here they are as a lawyer. And it's just not part of who they are. If they knew this ahead of time, leading into this, and if the parents were well informed, they would be able to make better decisions. Part of the beauty of astrology is that it gives us all the ability to be somebody. We all have special talents. We all are here for a purpose. Those talents are real. The talents are real, they're tangible, and when you live up to them and you use them in your best way possible, you can hit a home run. This is what makes people interesting. It's what makes them real. There's real character there when we see this in people. But you have to know what that is. Many people have been led astray. Now, it's not to say that everybody who has certain characteristics in their chart are going to go on to become a top-selling performing artist or write the world's best novel or, you know, become a world-famous artist or politician or engineer, whatever you want to be the best of. Not everybody has that ability, but the chart does show what the strengths of the individual are. And when you know your strengths, you can work on them, and when you know your weaknesses, you can work on them as well. These characteristics are really critical when it comes to career guidance, which is why I think that, you know, every guidance counselor in the world could do well by understanding astrology, understanding what is a person's character, what is their makeup, what are their strengths, what do they do right, what really turns them on. And I know myself in my own career, growing up, I was led astray. And yet if I looked back at my astrology chart when I was much younger, I would have been able to say, this is not a wise decision. It may have been a wise decision at the time, because it seemed right at the time, but what was that time based on? Was that time based on circumstances? Was that time based on, you know, a series of events that happened in my life at the events and where I was? Ultimately, we will live to the purpose of the chart, regardless of when that happens. And as I mentioned earlier, in another show perhaps, the concept of the clock and the ideas of the wheels moving. All these planets are moving at different ratios, different times. And when they strike an angle, then we begin to see the action in the astrology and individuals. This is so accurate when we see this happen. I've done countless charts for people around the world, and I don't know them at all. I have no idea who they are. All I know about them is their birth date, their birthplace, and their birth time. That's all I know about them. Date, place, and time. Someone called me from Singapore the other day on my radio show. I have a weekly radio show called Turning of the Wheel. And you'll see that from my website, www.turningofthewheel.com is my website. You can go there and you can see the interesting people I've had on my radio show to talk about these topics. So when I open up the phone lines, and it's on the World Wide Web, people can call from all over the world. And when they call from all over the world, I don't know where they're calling from. They could be calling from Switzerland, they could be calling from South Africa, they could be calling from Singapore. Well, this person calls from Singapore, and all they give me is that birth date, birthplace, and birth time. And in a matter of 5 minutes, after I cast the chart, I can see what's going on. I can see where their midheaven is. I can see what their type of work should be, where their greatest strengths are as far as work is concerned. I can see what their assets are. I can see what their liabilities are. I can say how best to manifest this. When was the timing best for you? When are you going to hit your best home run? When are you primed to do the right thing at the right time? Knowing that is critical, because you know as well as I do that timing is everything. Everything is timing. When you're in the right place at the right time, you're going to hit a home run. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you're not going to do so well. That's not to say that there isn't value in that. There is value in being in the wrong place at the wrong time, because it's how you learn. It's a matter of learning from your mistakes. When you learn from those mistakes, you make progress. It's clear. This is exactly what it's all about. But think of the time and effort you could save. Think of the people who have difficult relationships, or are troubled by their careers, and they want to find the real options, the real, what's the potential in their charts? Where can they do better? What can they do what are they not doing right? Oftentimes I can see in a person's chart, make distinct recommendations on what they can do, and it's so clear to me. And they are very thankful when they understand that they've done something at the wrong time and place. And they come back and they revise it, and they think about, wow, they put some energy in. And more often than not, the person already knows this. And what's fascinating about astrology is that it's validating. I'm a perfect stranger to them, calling from Singapore. They tell me they want to do this, and I say, this is the time to do it. They do it, and they have great results. I've seen this happen time and time again with people. I've oftentimes in the counsel that I do, the counseling and the life coaching that I go through with people, when I'm talking to them about what decisions to make and how to make them, and how to get through their relationships and how to solve their career problems, these are the types of issues that I talk about. And I often bring them fantastic ideas that they can then go off and implement and get great results. And they oftentimes know that it's right, but hearing it from somebody who they don't know, who can see that in an astrology chart, and it rings clear as a bell that this is what has to happen. When they see that happen, and it rings, as I said, as clear as a bell, then they know they're on the right path. And they know that the time is right. And that is what it's all about. It is all about timing. Timing is critical. And when you act accordingly, you can always do best. Because then you're in concert with the rest of the universe. You're working with the stars, and they're guiding you because of time and place, and the energy that's there, and the mathematical construct, the geometry of the universe, the divine logic, the sort of that mathematical precision that brings things about in the world is incredibly accurate. As time goes on, we're going to find more and more that mathematics is the core root of our very, very existence. And as time goes on, we're going to learn far more about what it is to be a human being, especially as the rate of progress increases. Thank you for listening today. Astrology is a fascinating science. My website, turningofthewheel.com. Join up for my newsletter. I'm on YouTube, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. I encourage you to hear what astrology can bring to you, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Thanks for listening.